loudness. So obviously from 0 to 120, 120 would be like a jet plane. And across the top, you've got your frequencies of sound. So you've got your low frequency sounds here and your high frequency sounds here. So speech is made up, obviously, of these low and these high frequency sounds. The low frequency sounds are louder, so they're easier to hear, and they give speech most of its volume. At the same time, the lower frequency sounds, that's these sounds here, only contribute to about 40% of the intelligibility of speech. Mid and high frequency sounds are quieter, these here and here, so they're more difficult to hear, and they add very little to speech volume. However, the amount of speech energy that they contribute is whopping 60% of intelligibility to speech. So you can imagine children that have a high frequency loss up here find it very, very difficult to understand speech. Some of the high frequency speech sounds also provide useful grammatical starters for in English. So you've got things like your plurals and your tense endings. So children with a high frequency loss, will find it very difficult to understand tenses and plurals. Okay, if you can just have a look at this next slide, if you can have a look at that first sentence and see if you can work out what you think that sentence might say. Anybody, any idea? Okay, so obviously we've just got the vowels there. We've got no consonants. We said the consonants give meaning to words and they're high frequency. So children with a hearing impairment obviously miss a lot of the consonants, and this is what they could possibly be hearing. So if I give you the next one, that's obviously got the consonants there. Can anybody give me an idea of what you think it might say now?
Richard Jack Horner has sat in the corner.
Thank you, that's good. I'm glad you can hear me. Okay, so you can see that it's definitely easier to decipher speech if we've got our consonants. And as we've said, our consonants are high frequency and they're what gives our clarity to speech. Okay. Okay. So we're going to go through just a few audiograms just for you to have a look at them. So if you have a deaf child in your school and you get an audiogram, you'll have some idea of what it means. So we have a red line and a blue line. The red line is our right ear, and we remember right and red, two R's together. And our left ear is our blue line or our crosses. This child has got a moderate loss in both ears. These are unaided audiograms. So they go, obviously, for us, they go to the GEM Centre. They have a hearing test in a soundproofed, very, very quiet room. And these are the results that we get. These don't take into consideration if you've got background noise and distractions in a classroom. So this child here won't have any access without their hearing aids to these sounds, any of these sounds. So we would say that a child with a moderate loss is going to struggle without a hearing aid in. Next one, we've got an added green line here. You might sometimes see this on an audiogram, and it actually means that it's a bone conduction, and it means that they do the audiogram through the mastoid bone behind the ear. So we would know from that this is a permanent loss, because obviously the bone conduction or the sound through the bone is also reduced. It's a mild loss, so the children have access to these speech sounds here, but again, here they don't have the access to the high frequency sounds, which we've just been talking about is really difficult, doesn't give the clarity to speech, and the things like tenses and plurals they're going to struggle with. Okay, this is what we call a high frequency loss. So their low frequencies are fine, their high frequencies are really down here in the profound. So again, we've got these high frequency sounds that they're going to find very difficult. And we've got another child here that's got a right ear that is a normal and the left ear that is low. All children have a different hearing loss, obviously, and it all depends on what the hearing loss is as to what they can hear. But your teacher of the deaf for your child in the school will be able to come and go through this with you, go through the speech banana with you, what the child can hear, what the child can't hear, and how you can help that particular child. Has anybody got any questions so far? No? Okay. Okay, so although hearing aids and speech processors are to do with cochlear implants, work in very different ways. They do have a lot in common. So these devices provide our pupils with access to speech, and they have enabled them to understand and develop spoken language. So you can see from those audiograms previously, a lot of those children wouldn't have developed spoken language unless they had a hearing aid or a cochlear implant. However, they do not restore normal hearing, and speech can still be very distorted. If I was doing this training face to face with you, I would have brought some hearing aids and you could have listened to them and seen what they sounded like. They're a bit sort of robotic-y, Dalek-y, and they can, the more gain they have on them, the more distorted speech can become. So they amplify speech sounds, but it's difficult to amplify so that the sound isn't distorted and sometimes fuzzy. So the pupils that are deaf are still really, really dependent on lip reading and visual cues from the teacher. They amplify background sounds more than an ear with normal hearing. So microphones on these devices are very sensitive, but they're not selective. They pick up and amplify all unwanted background noise, and they can't filter that out the way that we do. Adults who start using hearing aids in later life, and youngsters, if they're aided late, always notice and comment on this. So if you think about, if you're talking to a child who's got hearing aids and somebody is doing this next to them, and we all do, we all tap things, we all play with our lanyards, they're going to find that really difficult because their hearing aids amplify all the sounds, not just the speech. The optimal speaker-listener distance is about 2 metres away from the child. So although hearing aids pick up many sounds that are further away, the loudness, intelligibility and amplified speech decreases dramatically the further that you are away. Obviously, in a classroom, 2 metres is quite difficult to be that close to the child all the time when you want them to be at their optimal level. And also the higher frequency speech sounds are quiet sounds and dissipate more easily the further away that you are. As we said earlier, the high frequency sounds contribute to 60% of the intelligibility of speech, and they also help to discriminate between words with similar sounds. So what we can do is we give children some kind of device to help them hear. We have at the moment, we've got hearing aids, which most people I'm sure will have seen. So we have the hearing aid here, and then we have the little tubing that goes into the mould that's in the ear. The sound goes into the hearing aid, travels down the tube and into the ear canal, and then sound goes along as it would normally. And we also have this little device here, which is a cochlear implant. I will show you in a few minutes how that works. We also have something called BAHA, which is a bone conduction hearing aid. So it's for children that have got a conductive loss, the loss in the middle ear, and it goes onto the bone, so it actually bypasses the middle ear so that the sound goes directly through the bone and into the cochlea that way. All of these devices need batteries and they all need cleaning. Believe me, we see some really dirty ear molds. So this is about a cochlear implant. We don't have that many children, I say that, but we've probably got 20, 30 children in Wolverhampton that have got implants. So it looks very similar to a hearing aid here, which goes over the ear. And then you have a little circular coil, what we call a coil, that is like a magnet onto the head. Inside the head under the skin is another magnet, and that attaches to electrodes, which are these white things here. They go down through the mastoid bone and into the cochlea, and they send an electrical signal down the electrodes through the cochlea, and that sends a message through the nerve up to the hearing, up to the brain, and the brain learns to transfer that into sound. We would only use a cochlear implant for a child that's got a profound loss. They can, during the operation that they have, which is only a day case probably, if you're lucky, during the operation it can damage the hearing that the child has got. So unless they've got a profound loss and no useful hearing, they wouldn't do this operation in case it damages the hearing that they've got. It doesn't always work. I have seen children who've had implants and they don't work. Sometimes the cochlea is in a slightly different place than they thought it was, so the coils don't go, the electrodes don't go in properly. Or you might find that they're just not suitable to have a cochlear implant. The auditory nerve might not be working and they're not able to have one. They're getting more popular really, and more parents are going for them. And we have seen children that have got absolutely no hearing really, and they learn to speak, which is absolutely fantastic. This is one of the cochlear processors that we see. It's a Nucleus 6. It doesn't matter about all the little things. Just so you know what it looks like, this goes over the ear and that sits on the head. Okay, has anybody got any questions before we go any further? No? Okay, so I've got a couple of little videos for you. I haven't inserted the caption version of this video as I wanted you to experience the difficulties that the hearing impaired children face. Okay, see if I can start it off for you. Okay, so you can see from that video how difficult it is for children to hear, or hearing impaired children to hear with background noise in place, and also if there's a distance of that optimal distance of 2 meters. If it's more than that, they're going to find it very, very difficult. So what do we do to overcome that? So we try with radio aids. For some of the pupils, we also provide a radio aid which helps overcome some of the problems associated with listening in background noise or in unfavourable speaker listening distances. We normally provide a radio aid for children that have got a moderate or higher loss. So if you do come to us and say this child's only got a mild loss, but they're really, really struggling in class and background noise, then we will look at being able to provide a radio aid for you. The teacher wears this transmitter, and as long as it's worn correctly, everything she says is transmitted to the pupil's receivers. That's these. So it provides a direct signal, as if the teacher was speaking at the pupil's ear level. These receivers, they're only very, very tiny, and they fit onto the bottom of the children's hearing aids. There is a new hearing aid that's just come out a couple of months ago that this receiver is actually built into the hearing aid now, so you don't have to add anything onto the bottom of it. But obviously we've only got a few children coming through. If they have new hearing aids, then they will get those. But most children at the moment still have these little receivers attached to the bottom of their hearing aids. You need to be aware, if you have got a radio aid user in your classroom, that the child will only receive the signals if they are actually using their hearing aids with batteries in and their receivers are actually attached. I've been into that many classrooms and the teacher is diligently wearing the radio aid transmitter and the children don't have their receivers on. They won't get any sound at all. These systems are very expensive. They cost us about £1,500 for a whole system. About £500 each, and pupils, staff and parents are responsible for looking after this equipment. It has to be charged every evening, like a mobile phone has to be charged, ready for the next day. We also have systems that can go home. If you ask us if a system can go home, that's fine. And as long as they're going to be looked after at home by the parents, that's okay, and that they will make sure that they send them back to school every day, making sure that they're in place and ready to work. We do have insurance. We have a specialist insurance company that will insure our transmitters and receivers for us for use at home and at school, and we can give you information about that as well. Though we are responsible for these, and we will, if we can, replace them if they get lost or stolen or broken, we can't guarantee that we can because our budget is obviously getting smaller by the years, as everybody is, but we will try and replace it if we possibly can for you. Another issue that we have, the new Marvel aids, which are the new hearing aids that are coming out, do have the integrated receivers on them. The old hearing aids have a light on them so you can see when they're working. The new hearing aids don't. And unfortunately, I shouldn't say unfortunately because it's great for the children. They have a Bluetooth capability, so they can Bluetooth into music through their mobile phone. Unfortunately, the Bluetooth, takes precedence over the transmitter and there is no light, so you can't see. So if you're in a secondary school, I shouldn't really say secondary, but it is, you get children that will be listening to music through their hearing aids. It takes precedence over the radio aid and they won't be able to hear anything but their music they're playing. And we have had a couple of instances in secondary school where the teachers are having to monitor that they're actually listening to the radio aid and not the music from their mobile phone. It's a bit difficult, but there we go. So the pupil should give you the transmitter switched on, charged up and muted before the lesson or at the very start of the lesson. It needs to be on around your neck about 8 inches or a pen length away from your mouth, and the 3 microphones here that are on the front of the transmitter need to be pointing outwards and not covered. If you've got lanyards, jewellery, anything like that, it will bang against it and it can interfere with the sound that's going through to the receivers. The mute button is the most important and should be activated whenever you're not speaking to the hearing impaired pupil. So if you're having a conversation with another pupil, the hearing impaired student will be able to hear you. And just to make you aware, I have been caught using the toilet with a radio aid on because I forgot to mute it. So if you do have a radio aid, please make sure that you don't go to the toilet with it on. Okay, I'm not going to show you this video, but if you want to have a look at this at a later date, then you have a radio aid in your classroom, that's fine. It's just a few instructions on how to use it properly. Whoops, sorry. So this demonstrates how much clearer a hearing aid user hears when you use a radio aid transmitter when speaking at a distance that is unfavourable.
I'm currently wearing an EduMic and you're listening as if you're wearing hearing aids. I'm going to demonstrate how the sound changes as I walk further away from you. You'll notice that the sound clarity gets worse the further away I get. When I unmute the EduMic, you'll notice that the sound clarity gets much clearer. Which do you think you'd prefer, to listen with the digital microphone or without? You decide. I'm currently wearing...
Where are we? Okay, so we're back to the gentleman now, Dr. Jim at Varmouth Hearing Centre. He's now going to demonstrate how much clearer your voice will be if you use a radio aid transmitter when speaking at an unfavourable distance again. Okay. He calls the radio aid system in here a personal FM system, is what we used to call them, but they're now called radio aid systems. And he also has a microphone on a lapel mic that the old-fashioned radio aid systems used to have. So we'll see if I can just get you to where we were last time. Okay.
Because the hard of hearing student will have difficulty in the types of listening situations we've just seen, the use of a personal FM system may be recommended. I have the FM system set so that the microphone on the student's hearing aid is still functioning. I'm going to walk 10 feet away from the microphone of the hearing aid, and as I do so, you will again notice that it becomes very difficult to understand what I am saying. When I am at the maximum distance, I will activate the teacher's FM microphone, and you should see an improvement in your ability to understand me. Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack went down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. You should notice now that there is an increase in your ability to understand me with the FM microphone on. The FM microphone allows the teacher mobility so that he or she can move about the room and the student can still hear what the teacher is saying. As I walk back towards the hearing aid now, I am going to shut off the teacher's microphone and you will lose the FM advantage. As I walk back closer to the hearing aid, you will see that my speech becomes easier to understand until I am back at the optimal listening condition where you should be understanding me with little difficulty.
Okay, has anybody got any questions so far? No? Okay, so you can see demonstrating how useful it is for a radio aid to be worn, especially in a classroom where there's lots of background noise for those children that are deaf. Just like to remind you to be mindful that pupils need to see your face as well. Even though they've got a radio aid system on, they still need to use the face and the cues from the face and lip reading to be able to make the most of their residual hearing. Okay. So these are just, when we go into schools, we do functional listening assessments with children, and we do this every year for the children that we see regularly, and when they have an appointment at the GEM Centre for those that we don't. So there's 4 different children here. I haven't got their level of hearing, but I have just obviously got functional listening assessment results. So you can see here where you've got quiet conditions. So we do these functional listening assessments in a quiet room in 1-to-1. So we've got quiet conditions with the hearing aids in, but no radio aid system. And this is the percentage of speech sounds that the child can discriminate. So pupil A has got your 94% of sounds that they can hear in a quiet situation with no radio aids. We then add background noise, so we play Babble through our laptops to give background noise, still with hearing aids, but with no radio aid system. And it's nearly halved. It's dropped, oh gosh, I'm so sorry, it's dropped to 52%. So that child is clearly finding it really difficult to discriminate speech. And then the bottom column is where we've added a radio aid system, and you can see that it's upped again to 85%. And it's the same for all of the children. For pupil C, there's not that much difference. I would guess that pupil C has probably got a mild loss. But for the other children, it drops when background noise is added with no radio aid system, and it leaps up again when the radio aid system is used. We'd use this to demonstrate to the children as well as the teachers how useful a radio aid system is. We do have children as they go into secondary school particularly that don't like the use of a radio aid system. They don't like to be different. They don't like to have to pass it to the teacher when they walk into a classroom. And this will demonstrate to them how much they need it. Doesn't always encourage them to use it, but it does demonstrate to them how much they need it. Okay, has anybody got any questions? No? Okay. So these are some of the areas that the hearing impaired child in the classroom would like you to consider. And these are areas that we've asked the deaf children and said to them, what would you like teachers that teach you to consider about you? And these are what they've given us. So social inclusion, especially for the teenage children these days, obviously social inclusion is massive for everybody, and deaf children find this really difficult. They want to feel accepted, and they sometimes struggle to accept that they're different and that they're unique. Sometimes we do have secondary children that are very positive and they're not bothered about their deafness. They're quite happy to talk about it with other children, but the majority of them we find are quite self-confident and find they don't like it. They don't like having to use the hearing aids. They don't like what they look like. They don't like the fact that nobody else has got them. Some of them will stop using the equipment and stop letting their teachers know that they're having difficulties, and then that's when they start to really struggle in the classroom. There's also lesson presentations. We found this a lot during the COVID pandemic when a lot of children were given videos to watch at home. They really, really struggle. They find it very, very difficult to write notes from a screen at the same time as listening to it because they need to lip read. So we did ask if they could have transcripts of lessons and things like that to help them. Seating positions is a big one. How many times I go into a classroom and the deaf child is at the back of the class. They can't function properly when they can't lip read, so they need to be sitting at the front of the class. If they are a unilateral loss, so one ear is better than the other, then they need to obviously have the better ear near to the teacher. Class discussions is another one. They really struggle because obviously if you're in a class discussion and lots of different people are talking at the same time, they find that difficult. If they can't see someone's face, they find it difficult. So if they're sitting at the front, which is great, and somebody talks behind them, then they might find that difficult to understand. So we do say to teachers, if there is something important that is said by one of their peers, can they please repeat it to make sure that the deaf child can understand that? Tiredness. Our deaf children get really tired by the end of the day. We have a deaf tutor who works for us, and he will say to us by the end of the day he's absolutely shattered if he hasn't had an interpreter with him because he has to listen so hard. And a lot of our deaf children by the end of the day are really tired. So if there's something that's, I know everything is important at school, but if something is particularly important, to try and do that when they're fresh, so either after a break or in the mornings. Equipment, we've already said children don't like to be different. They don't seem to as bad at primary school, but when they get to secondary school, they find it difficult that they've got equipment and they've got to hand it to a teacher and be seen with something that's different. Lip reading, we already said they like to be at the front so that they can lip read. Also need to be aware of if there's a light behind you, they're going to find it very, very difficult to lip reading. So if you're standing in a window talking to a deaf child and the sun is shining, they're going to find it very, very difficult. And noise levels, so things like fans or anything like that that's going off in a classroom, or a computer that's whirring. Hearing aids amplify every sound, so they don't they're not subjected to what they pick up. They'll pick everything up, and children find that really difficult. And then we've talked about language development with the different sounds that they can hear. When you've got plurals, word endings, vocabulary, all that kind of thing, deaf children find that really, really difficult. Okay. So this is a video from different deaf children who are going to tell you what they think about background noise.
As we all know, classrooms can be very noisy places, and that can have a dramatic effect on a pupil's ability to follow a lesson.
When something noisy in art or RMT, if something I don't need, I use switch off, help me to concentrate and know something else.
Ventilator, the noisy, like air coming out from in the ventilator, and then outside can't keep past it.
In lesson, I say tapping thing annoying me.
To shut out, put the answer.
They have to just stop talking, and then I can hear the teacher.
You're about to get a taste of a deaf child's world. You'll see, hear, and experience how background noise can affect a child during a lesson.
Now, let's look at the second part of the task. The second part is where you're going to find three things that measure the extent of
Hearing aids and cochlear implants aim to provide hearing within the speech frequencies. The microphones pick up sounds from around the wearer. Unfortunately, they're not selective, so all sound, including background noise, is picked up. But taking very simple measures can reduce this problem significantly.
Okay, boys and girls, eyes to the front, pencils down. You should have finished that part by now. The next task that we're going to do is you're going to think of 3 different things that are going to add up to be 25.
There is further technology available which can create a better listening environment within a classroom, such as radio aids.
Speak through the mic and then my receiver picks up what they're saying, and I can hear from the other side of the room, or they're talking, even if they're taking the back, I can still hear them from the mic. Also, it turns off the background, so when people are talking and the teacher's talking, I only can hear the teacher.
On the back of my hearing aid, I've got like this button, it's got like different stations, so I can hear the teacher's voice, or everyone.
If she's over there and I'm outside on the field, on the corner, I will hear her because she's talking.
When I got my radio thing on, she always checks to make sure it works every single week.
She'll do this. It does. It's my friend, that's me.
When using radio aids, be careful not to obscure the microphone or stand too close to any background noise, as this too will be amplified. The microphone should be 15 to 20 centimetres from the mouth. Make sure the transmitter and receiver are on the same frequency. And remember to turn the radio aid off when speaking to another child and when leaving the classroom. Remember that some young people are embarrassed about having to hand the microphone to the teacher and reminding them how to use it correctly. Try to build in systems so that this is dealt with sensitively. Maybe you could have a set place to put the microphone at the start and end of every lesson. Sound field systems can also significantly improve the quality of sound in a classroom.
The teacher's voice comes through speakers on the walls from the microphone that the teacher's using. And it means that all children can hear the voice clearly, so it tends to keep the noise down and it becomes a quieter classroom. The children who have hearing aids can also use the radio aid that's tuned into the same frequency. So that's what we're able to do so that they can hear the teacher's voice clearly.
As soon as you switch your sound field system on, all the children sort of sit up, and I can tell that it's really improved the listening skills for the deaf children, most importantly, and also the skills of the whole class. Because as well as sort of having children with cochlear implants and hearing aids, there are lots of children whose hearing is down, perhaps because of glue ear and sort of problems with colds and things. But, yes, I'm a firm believer in the sound field system.
Okay, so that was obviously a lot of children there are in bases or in schools for the deaf. So obviously profoundly deaf, that's why they're signing. But obviously it applies to all the children in normal mainstream schools as well. Thought it was quite valuable to hear what some of those deaf children think about the noises that they mentioned. So they talked about peers tapping pens or clicking pens, friends whispering to them, noise from lorries outside windows and things like that. Also, if you've got a playground next to your classroom and you have the window open, then that's going to be a lot of background noise as well. I think staff make a lot of unconscious noises. I know I tap my pen and you do hear staff who jingle keys or money in pockets and things like that. So you need to think about the different background noise that you're making for the deaf child that you're teaching. Obviously, with COVID at the moment and having to have windows and doors open, it's difficult to reduce the external noise. But if you can, try to avoid long teacher-led lessons or discussions during the noisiest time of the day. They did also mention sound field systems in that video. We do have a couple of schools in Wolverhampton that have got sound field systems, and if they're used, they're really beneficial, not just for the deaf children, but all children. If you do have a sound field system in your school that might well have been redundant for a long time, please let us know and we'll see if we can try and get it working again. They are a really useful tool if you've got one. Okay. Oh, goodness me, come on.
No, classrooms pupils are
Something I
do apologise.
And then
What's going on here? So if we think about acoustics in a classroom, I'm not going to play this video, but if you can think about your classroom where your deaf child is, hard floors, windows without blinds, very high ceilings, anything like that is going to be really difficult for a deaf child. So what we do ask, if you've got a deaf child coming into your school and you have a classroom that has a carpet opposed to another classroom that doesn't, or you have a classroom that doesn't back onto a busy corridor or a playground, or you have blinds on the windows in some classrooms and not others, that you'll consider which classroom the deaf child is going to go into, just so it makes the acoustics of the room a bit better for them. So hearing impaired pupils find it difficult to listen and do another task at the same time. We've already said about watching a video and taking notes at the same time because they need to lip read, so they find that really, really difficult. So strategies that you could use, you could give them a brief outline or a summary of new concepts and vocabulary. You could give them a transcript of a video so that they can have a look at it before the lesson and then they can follow it a bit easier. You could give them a printout of a PowerPoint presentation, or you could give them the link to a YouTube video that they could watch at home before the lesson if possible. If it's not possible or not feasible, you could get similar resources could be given to the child to consolidate the learning afterwards. So we do ask if you have new vocabulary for a child to pre and post teach these to them, because that will always help them. And obviously to use open questions to check that the child has actually understood what you were saying to them. A lot of deaf children have the coping strategy of saying yes. I have a little girl who is now in year 5 and she's spent the last 5 years saying yes to everything because it's easier for her to say yes than it is to actually admit that she hasn't heard or understood what's going on. We've done so much coaching to her to say how she can speak up for herself and self-advocate for herself, to say, actually, I didn't hear that. Oh, can you do it again for me? But she just doesn't have the confidence to do that. So it's something to be aware of. Okay, homework's often given out at the end of a day. Not so much, I think, in primary school, but in secondary school, I know when I was at school all those years ago, they used to give out the homework as you were running out of the school, out of the class to playground. And it was difficult then to hear, especially for a deaf child, to be able to hear what the homework is they have to do. So try to check to make sure that they've got an understanding of what that homework is, write it down for them, give it on a piece of paper already written for them, give homework out at the beginning of the lesson, in the middle of the lesson, so that they don't miss what they've got to do. It's all something else that makes them feel a bit more included in their class. Has anybody got any questions? I'm conscious here that I'm battling on, and please ask if there's anything you want to ask. No? Okay. So all deaf children are entitled to special arrangements for assessments and exams. It has to be the normal way of working in the classroom. So they are entitled to have, most children, to have 25% extra time, to have rest breaks, and to have take their exams in a smaller or quieter room. I remember when I was doing an exam and I had Mr. Elliott walking up and down the classroom, and his shoes were squeaking, and it really, really annoyed me. But now I think how difficult that would be for a deaf child, because that would be amplified by his hearing aids, and obviously that would be really, really difficult for them. We would apply for exam arrangements or special arrangements through the exams officer at the school, we will do a letter for you in support of that. So that will obviously help you get those extra arrangements for them. Okay, I'm not going to go through these videos. Again, this has been recorded. I can send it to anybody who wants it. But there's some videos here. They're more based around secondary school for supporting achievements, and they're English, maths and science. So feel free if you want to come back and have a look at those afterwards. Okay. Okay, so possible language difficulties that you might have with a hearing impaired child. It's really important to appreciate that many hearing impaired pupils have difficulties with language development. They're often delayed, and not only because they hear distorted speech, but also because they don't have the same opportunities to incidental language as hearing children do. If you think about a hearing child that is sitting in the lounge while mum and dad are talking in the kitchen, they're going to be able to pick up some of that conversation and some of that vocabulary from mum and dad, whereas a deaf child is unlikely to do that. So this slide's provided an overview of some of the difficulties that they might have. Okay, so the clarity of speech, intelligibility of speech and volume of speech we've talked about. Difficulties with tenses and pronouns, these high frequency sounds that they can't hear. They tend to omit small words in sentences, so they'll use the key words, but they don't add in these small words. And also unstressed word endings, again, endings and plurals. They've got a reduced auditory memory, so this affects their ability to understand information and instructions. They have difficulty in understanding longer or more complex sentences, not just because of the length of it, but because of the vocabulary. And spelling strategies because of the sounds that some of the children can't hear. Obviously, if they can't hear the sound properly, it's going to be very difficult when you're spelling and phonics. And in big bold letters is their vocabulary. Most of the deaf children that we see have very, very poor, well, I shouldn't say very, very poor, but poorer vocabulary than a hearing child does because of this lack of being able to pick up incidental language. So we say they have had gaps in their receptive vocabulary and may not understand words that you would expect a child of their age to hear. Had a little girl a couple of weeks ago that didn't know what fur was, and she was year 6. You would just expect a child of year 6 to understand what the word fur meant, but she didn't. They often attach one meaning to a word or phrase or understand it in one context only. Oh, goodness me, sorry. They don't understand idioms and can take these literally, like pull your socks up. They would do that rather than understand what it really means. Don't let the cat out of the bag. It's raining cats and dogs, that kind of thing. So considering the language that you use when you deliver lessons and explain concepts, just think about their lack of vocabulary and how that can affect them. Try to check their understanding and expand their language all the time. We find Google images really invaluable. We use a lot of Google images when they don't understand what a word means. That's something that you can clearly do in school as well. And their expressive language might be delayed, so they will only use the words that they understand, as we would. If you can't get the word, then you would use a word that is easy because you would understand it, and that's what our deaf children do. Just a couple of things here which are a bit side to this really, but most of our hearing impaired pupils will have some input from speech and language therapy, especially in primary school. When they move over to secondary school, this might have stopped. We might not always know that they have speech and language therapy because it can come through school and we don't know that. So it's difficult for us, obviously, to work with the speech and language therapist if we don't know they're coming in. So that is something to be mindful of. To please let us know if there is a speech and language therapist that comes into school that is seeing the students so that we can work on targets with them. And also EHCPs, we're not always told when a review is for a child. So please let us know so that we can give a report for that. Hopefully that will get better, but at the moment, sometimes we're not always told about that. So this chart shows the scores for BPVS, which is a vocabulary assessment. So the child at the top has got a moderate loss, and if you look, they have an extremely low score for vocabulary because they miss so many sounds of speech and all that incidental language. The next child has a mild loss. They've got an average score, which is great. High frequency loss. We've talked about high frequency loss and how these high pitched sounds and the clarity of speech is missing. So that obviously affects their vocabulary, and they have got a moderately low score. We then look at the next one who has got a mild loss, and you would think, oh, actually only a mild loss, they should be okay. They've come out as a low average score, but when we look at the child, he also has a visual impairment. So with hearing impairment and visual impairment, that would give him obviously more issues with vocabulary. And the last child has got a mild loss, so he's come out as a high average score, which is great. So you can see from that the children that we see that have high frequency losses or moderate losses, and they've got a lot of sounds that they don't hear, all this incidental language is missed, that their vocabulary scores are quite low. As we said, pre and post teaching of new vocabulary that comes, scientific vocabulary or anything that they're going to meet in class, is really useful if you can pre and post teach that. Okay, has anybody got any questions? No? Okay. So this is just a little video about social and emotional issues for deaf children. The clip discusses lots of issues that some hearing impaired children in mainstream schools face, including their feelings of being different, their lack of self-esteem and their confidence, the limited deaf awareness of the pupils that their peers that they are with at school, and difficulties with friendships and socialising both in and out of school. It's important to try and help the hearing impaired children feel more self-confident and to accept that they're unique and different, but actually that it's positive and how that they could celebrate being unique. And also to explain to the hearing children in the class about why they're wearing a hearing aid, what it is that it does for them, why the teacher is possibly using a radio aid system, and how they can hopefully help to communicate with the deaf child. As a service, we do deaf awareness training, and we will also have access to somebody called it's Zebra Access. It's an organisation in Wolverhampton who has deaf role models that will come into school and do mentoring with deaf children as well to help social and emotional. Okay, so I'll just play this video.
As we all know, being at school isn't just about achieving academic results. It's also about making friends, learning how to interact with different people, and developing communication skills. Break times and lunch times can be a difficult time for deaf children. A noisy dining hall is difficult for any of us to hear in, but imagine what it's like for somebody wearing a hearing aid or a cochlear implant.
Sometimes I can hear a little bangs and clatters when the lunch ladies are getting the chairs and tables out for ready for lunch.
When they eat it, when they finish, they scrape it.
If it is noisy, what I do, I turn my hearing aid off and I lip read other people.
I don't eat in the dining room because it's really noisy and crowded and there's a lot of people in there.
While it's impossible to solve all the problems of a noisy dining hall, there are some simple measures that can be taken. Seat deaf children on the table furthest away from noisy serving areas. Make sure lunchtime supervisors are aware of who the deaf children are. Encourage them to use good communication techniques, making sure a deaf child can see them when they're talking, and using sign where appropriate. Make sure that hearing children are aware of the impact that loud noises can have on deaf pupils. Break times can also be a confusing and isolating time for deaf children.
I didn't understand the other children. They were playing control games and I didn't understand them. So I just spoiled it all because I didn't understand them.
Well, at break time I just stay inside because I don't really like going outside because I get scared that I'm going to play with somebody and a bit of wind goes through my implant and gets all scratchy then.
Sometimes boy was started with so ain't easy because we saw they get ain't easy, yeah, because it could be distracted or that angry. Yeah, I told them stop it, but they should keep going. I want me all the time.
Some of my friends, they go to the signing club and they can sign with me, and it's fine. It's easy to learn, and she can talk to me and I can sign with her.
Yeah, more easy than Nate. Yeah, like she's made friends quick. Like a bit like Sister Brothers, similar, but it's like that. And even hard to make friends, hard to know Nate because they talk and I sign.
I don't hang around hearing people each time. I normally hang around with deaf people. I feel confident with them. We sign and we communicate. We don't leave each other out.
There are lots of ways that we can help deaf pupils get the most out of their school life and give them positive social experiences.
For example, hearing children, they're learning social skills incidentally all the time, and they're involved in the school curriculum. It's not formally taught to them, they're just learning the skills at home and at school. But deaf children, because of the communication barrier, they don't get access to this incidental learning, so it's difficult for them to develop the social skills.
If a child's having problems making friends, we do have a counselling service in this school which allows children to go and talk, and that's facilitated with an interpreter for the deaf children.
For Rachel particularly, who I think has felt quite isolated, we've managed to devise a buddy system whereby she has pupils that stay in at playtime with her or take her outside of the playground, whichever she wants to do, but who are with her at playtime so that she's not just on her own all of the time.
Our children have different friendship groups. They like to play with the deaf children and the hearing children, and that's facilitated by having sign language and sign language clubs that we've run, so that the hearing children have learnt to sign alongside the deaf children. We've also had sign singing lessons all through the school, so the children all learn to sign through sign songs, and therefore they have an ability to communicate through sign.
We decided that we would introduce circle time, which was just a time when they could come and sit and relax with the staff and perhaps bring out problems that they were worrying about. And we were very keen to enhance the self-esteem of a particular group of young girls who were really struggling with that. And so we introduced this idea of having a star board where they nominate each other for something that they'd done. And to be honest, I wasn't at all sure that it would work, but it has worked extremely well.
The circle time is good. It's helping each other to, yeah, explain and even solve the problem, or put it on some sub, or yeah, if the people was behaved very well.
And one of the main benefits is that as they've gone through the school, the older ones have taken on the role of giving advice to the younger ones, and the younger ones have seen that happening, and then as they come through, they take on the role of advisors as well.
One of our boys is a play leader, and he takes responsibility to organise the games at dinner time, and he's a deaf child working with all the hearing children. He's very included in all the extended school opportunities that we have.
You have to help the infants, make sure that they have a nice time playing with the toys.
As a mainstream teacher, any way that you can incorporate deaf issues into your lessons will help the whole school to become more deaf aware. If you can, bring in deaf role models to give talks.
Deaf adults working as deaf role models can help the deaf children in developing their social skills and how to cope with life when they get older and leave school so they fit into the hearing world. So far, we've learnt about deaf identity. Do you remember? So far, we've been learning about deafness, culture and community. The deaf children get the wrong philosophy, and they think when they grow up they'll become hearing, and it can become emotionally and psychologically difficult for them. So when I go and meet the children and they've got access to a deaf adult, we have an instant bond straight away. It's like the impact that it has on the children is amazing. The children think, oh right, when I grow up, I'm still going to be deaf. And I help them to become confident and proud of their identity, saying that you don't have to pretend to be hearing, and you should be proud of yourself as a deaf person. Be positive about your deafness.
By taking a few simple steps, you and your school can have a dramatic impact on the learning experience of a deaf child and their enjoyment of school life.
Well, now it would be quite strange not to teach deaf children, not to have deaf children in my class. I'd really feel I was missing something.
Having the deaf children at Furbeck has made our community very inclusive, diverse, and very, very positive.
It's not something I even think twice about, having someone that's deaf in the class, and I think it actually brings something different and unique to the class, which the students really appreciate.
These children are here to learn, and with your help, they'll be able to achieve their true potential.
Okay, so it's easier, obviously, if we're in a base, for our base children to have a positive deaf identity, because they see deaf children every day and they mix with them and they are their peers. For a lot of the children that we see, they are the only deaf child in a school, and they find that quite difficult. And we do get a lot, like they've just said on the video, well, it'll get better, I'll be better when I get older, and they don't appreciate that actually they will still be deaf when they're older, which is really sad. As I said, we've got Neil, our deaf tutor, who will come into school. He's a positive deaf role model. He will talk to children about how he got through school and how he now works, and he's profoundly deaf. We also have, or we do try and do activities that we run. Obviously, it's been a bit difficult with COVID. We haven't been able to do many, but we are hopefully trying to pick that up a little bit. We do an early years playgroup. We do bowling sessions and going out for pizza and stuff with the older children, and we are hoping to pick that up a bit. We've also started the Wolverhampton Deaf Children's Society again, which is became inactive for a couple of years. So we're trying to get that going again as well, where the deaf children can share activities and events and actually see somebody else that has hearing aids and somebody else that is deaf, save them being so isolated. Has anybody got any questions to now? No? Okay. I just want to show you one very, very short clip before we finish that's just to sort of explain a little bit more about social and emotional for this is obviously an older child, but here we are. Where are we? Through. Oh, come on. Sorry, I can't get onto the to the last video I wanted. Here we are.
Guys, check this out, right? Oh my god, you are not gonna believe this. You know how I was meant to be meeting Sophie after school last Friday, right? Well, I was meeting her on the bridge, yeah? And when I got there, guess what I saw? There was this group. There was 3 of them, all in massive hats. He was rocking around the corner, but Jeff's mum holding an enormous. It looked like a massive fish, right? She totally kissed that monkey. Totally landed the plane. But the best part, the absolute best part of the whole thing, and I've never seen anything like this. Okay, check this out. See you, man. Oh, we're back, guys.
What was that last bit again? What happened?
tell you later, okay?
Okay. Imagine how you would feel if you missed the absolutely best part of that conversation with all your friends and you couldn't be part of it. Okay. That's the end of my presentation to you. I'm sorry it was a bit muddled. One thing that I would like to do, I'm just going to put my camera on and I just want you to see if you can lip read some of the words that I'm saying to you. Okay, just as the ending bit. If you can put in the chat what word it is you think that I'm saying. Anybody got any idea?
Sorry, Rachel, my internet went down there.
Oh,
what did you say, Sophie? Keeps going in and out.
It's right, I was just seeing if you could lip read what I was saying.
Oh.
Yeah, that's fine. Don't worry about it. Okay, so those words that I've just said, one was man, one was pat, and one was pan. So on the lips, they all look the same, but obviously they're all three different words. So it's very difficult for our children to lip read everything that you're saying in class. Is there anything that anybody would like to add or ask before we leave? Olivia's asked, recommended children to clean their hearing aids.